Hey guys, check out our new channel, Thrive, for families dealing with substance abuse. We've got a lot of great information up there for you. So make sure you check it out. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. John Kelly, profiler here, and welcome. Great to have you here today. We really appreciate you. And I really appreciate Dustin Ranck. We're honored to have Dustin on today. Fantastic private investigator. I mean, really solid, really knows his stuff. And welcome, Dustin. It's so good to have you.
Yeah, thanks, John. Honored to be here as always.
Excellent. Today we're going to be looking at what happened to Sudiksha Konanki. I am very concerned about this. This young woman was supposedly swept out to sea and never to be seen again. I am very, very concerned about it. Her family has decided that they want her declared dead. They want to get on with, the business of honoring her in the afterlife. I'm not that quick to write her off, as you know. I believe until we find a body, there is still hope. There's no question about it. Dustin, what do you have to say about this? I mean, supposedly they were out in the waves, her and her new friend, and next thing you know, supposedly she's swept out to sea. He tried to save her, but she swept out to sea. Just your 2 cents on it before I jump in here.
Yeah, this is a aside from being an extremely sad situation, there's a lot of things that we've been kind of chewing away at here on my end, as we're looking at the totality of that event. Obviously we've got a beach, beaches have currents, they have waves. Punta Cana there doesn't, according to the news reports, they had and something we talked about previous to the show, like they did have a red flag warning up for the currents. I don't know how common that is. That's not peak storm season around there. I'm not saying that it's something that a tourist or a visitor shouldn't pay attention to, but as a lifelong surfer, and I'm not one of these rock star big wave guys, but I've certainly spent time in the water to know you take some of that with a grain of salt based on your experience, based on local knowledge, based on the conditions, the time of year. There's a lot of things that can factor into like your judgment around currents and tidal shifts and stuff. But that area doesn't have like it's not got like a really high tide area. Like there's some places I've surfed where the tide differential is like 10 feet, and that gets pretty gnarly. I think it's only the nearest gauging station is up the coast a little ways, so it's not a perfect it's not a perfect data set for that specific beach, but you're only looking at a tide differential of a couple of feet, which to me, as somebody that spends time in the water, you don't ever discount the ocean. Like as soon as you do that, you're getting into trouble. But it wouldn't, unless you were a smaller child, it wouldn't concern me as much, but we do also have, the variable, right? Like, and this is a pretty big one. We've got alcohol involved. And, I mean, how many times have we seen like some completely normal event go sideways because of people getting shit hammered drunk and they make a mistake or they pull some boneheaded maneuver. And I'm not judging anybody. I've done plenty of that stuff in my day. So, I'm not calling anybody out for that at all. But it happens, right? And there's some of the information surrounding it that I know of doesn't 100% jive with my experience with people. Again, I'm not calling anybody out. I'm just saying and I'm not just talking about the young man. I'm just saying that in its totality, there's some kind of interesting stuff going on there. So, and I'll bring this out later, and it's something we had mentioned, but there's also another variable that I think probably has, let's just say for a minute, like, let's just assume this young man is innocent, and let's just say, this young woman didn't get swept out to sea. There's a third variable that I think we have to talk about that would put somebody of that age bracket in that condition at an extremely high risk. And so we can get into that in a moment. But yeah, there's the water thing doesn't, could it happen? 100% it can. It's the ocean. I mean, I've pulled a lot of people out of the water that were just, one minute they're having a great time, and the next minute, you got a rip current, or they got a tide, something going on with the tide, or they get bowled over, and maybe they're not a strong swimmer. Like, a lot of people don't realize how powerful the ocean is, and you got to really have a lot of respect for it if you're going to interact with it. So, with all
And
that
this
being said,
guy, I'm sorry, finish.
no, go ahead. No, go ahead, John.
This guy, I mean, he's a big, strong guy, right?
Yeah,
He said more or less, if I have it right, that he wrestled her to shore. He wrestled her, well, almost to shore, out of the wave, out of this huge wave that hit both of them, and
yeah,
not flying, right? But he was able to grab her and bring her close to shore. Then he was filled with seawater, so he had to spit it up. So he threw up the seawater, the ocean's water, or whatever it was. And the next thing he's sick, and he's really feeling tired and weak from wrestling her out of that wave and himself out of that wave and getting them to shore. And the last thing he sees is her in like knee deep water. And and he says, "Are you all right?" Or he says something to her. She doesn't answer. He passes out on the beach, something to that effect. There's a number of different stories on it. And, God bless him for, his work and his helping her and everything. But the whole thing is like, it's not like, if she's in knee deep water, I mean, is she going to get swept out in knee deep water again? I mean, I don't quite understand it all. And she was heading towards her clothes, but then, the clothes are still there the next morning. I mean, there's so many strange twists and turns. I'm just curious looking at these different angles, these different possibilities. But, as you talked about, please finish with the whole piece, because I think it's very important. I know where you're going. It's a very dangerous area, right? I mean, a
yeah,
girl of being that beautiful, being that petite, being so vulnerable on a beach.
yep,
Talk about that, because he's passed out at this point in time, supposedly, if she's on the beach, but he hasn't heard anything from her. Like, he said something to her, "You okay?" or something like that. She never answered. He passed out, right? I mean, I think that's a story. There's been a number of stories. And certainly we have to give him credit for, what he did for her. But bottom line is, that's a dangerous part of town. I mean, we checked it out. You checked it out. You saw
yeah,
the warnings on the area. I checked it out with a couple of my friends. One of them, a major homicide player, he said, "Man, you go down there, you stay at that hotel. You don't leave the hotel. You don't leave the ground.
yep.
You don't venture, far from your hotel. Go ahead.
Right.
Go ahead. I'm sorry."
No, it's, I'm going to back up into this just a second, but you were talking about, this interaction that they had in the water. When I've pulled people out of the water that had been struggling, and I'm not talking like risk for imminent drowning, but people, they're ducking waves, they catch a, lung full of water or whatever. You get them out of that situation. It's pretty, if they're not used to being in the water a lot, where that's just, kind of doing business, that can be a pretty scary event for somebody. It's when you start losing your ability to breathe and you're getting pushed around on the water, you got to really, your adrenaline level starts to spike. It starts using up the oxygen in your body. And I've never pulled anybody out of the water that was struggling that immediately wanted to go back in. So that being said, I don't know what their situation was. I wasn't there. But to your point, John, that I'm not calling anybody a liar. I'm just saying there, kid, they were drinking, they're young, like he could be scared. Of course he's traumatized, but regardless of what's going on. So it could just be his way of communicating, and it's just coming out kind of disjointed. Um, and I feel for him too, if that's the case. Like, nobody wants to be in that situation. But the Dominican Republic is like, it's beautiful. They got these white sand beaches. I got these just bitchin' resorts, right? But that is like sex trafficking central for the Caribbean. I mean, I think it's like the second or third most, instances of sex trafficking and human trafficking and enslavement in the Caribbean. And that's not a small area either. A lot of narcotics running through there. It's got the largest or third largest stateless population in the hemisphere. And what that means is you got a lot of people living there that don't actually have citizenship. And I'm not making this an immigration thing. What I'm saying is there's just a lot of displaced people there that aren't protected and aren't operating within the laws of the country, right? Like, you've got just a huge transient population that, and you add the drugs and you add, everything else, and look where it is. I mean, it's this little island out in the middle of nowhere. Of course, it's a stopover place for narcotic trafficking and you name it. And it's also a really, really big spot for Europeans to come to engage in sex trafficked activities. I mean, there's a lot of like slavery type stuff going on there. So, man, I mean, that angle concerns me. Well, I mean, it's all concerning, but that would concern me the most, because if somebody snatched this young woman, she's not dead. She's actually out there somewhere, and you can just, do the math that she's not being treated well, and they may never get her back. I mean, at least if you recover a body, you've got some closure. And at least at that point, it's a natural death. If she drowned, we don't know if her death was caused by this young man or not. We don't have a clue right now. But I would put more money on a trafficker. Like, it's a little hard to explain to people that don't deal with this stuff all the time, but like these people, we always talk about how serial killers blend into their environment. I mean, these sex traffickers are no different. They're not out murdering people, obviously, but they're human predators, and they look just like you and me. They look like anybody else, and they're always on the prowl. Like, those guys are like the ultimate opportunistic predators. I mean, they will grab somebody if they think that if the planets line up and they see the opportunity, and you couldn't pick a better, you know, place than where she disappeared. You've got a stretch of beach. It's, wee hours of the morning. You got a tree line that bookends between the water and the hotel, so you don't have any lines of sight. I mean, man, it
No
wouldn't take
cameras. There's no cameras. No
nothing.
cameras there.
No,
Yeah,
no.
there's
So
no cameras.
it's a prime spot for somebody to, and you got to think too, like, for a place that has that high degree of sex trafficking, especially in a transient area, not just the population, but you think about the tourism. I mean, what are people doing down there? Like, they're not sitting in their hotel room watching movies, they're out partying. So, you have a additional layer of vulnerability going on there, aside from being young and maybe not being situationally aware as maybe an older person would. Not that that's going to guarantee your safety, but like you said, the guy that we know that was talking about being down there, you got to be extremely careful. And that's with knowing everything that we know. But if you're a young kid, you're just down there partying, having a good time with your peeps, you're not looking out for that stuff, And
No,
and I'm
and
not.
and the other thing too, Dustin, that you brought up, you know, it could be the ocean. She could have been swept out. Okay, I mean, look, it's either the ocean or she was taken off the beach, right? I mean,
Yeah.
one or two places, right? Now, the other part of that is if she was swept out in the ocean, I mean, the way I have been trained, what I've come up with, people I've worked with, drowned people at some point float to the top.
Yeah.
Even if they're weighted down, body parts at some point will float to the top. Okay. I know there's 3 or 4 cases there of people that drowned. So I'm all in it for her being swept out to sea and drowned as a really good probability. But I can't, without a body, I cannot say that definitely happened. And we're talking about the beach or the ocean, and it's one or the other. All right. And if it was the beach, then she didn't just disappear on the beach. Somebody swept her off the beach or abducted her or something like that. Okay. So, I mean, she didn't run away without her clothes. Her clothes were there. So she didn't run
Yeah.
away without her clothes. This whole thing is a big mystery. This is a big mystery. There's a lot of different angles. There's a lot of different angles here as well. Because the other thing you're looking at, him being the last person to see her, but then he passes out, right? So he's out. He's out for the count. And, when I watched the video of him going down, he had sneakers on, he had socks on. So all said, I watched the picture of him coming back. There's no socks, there's no sneakers. I don't know what happened. Rough night out. Yeah, for sure. They were drinking, partying. This is what can happen. But the bottom line is, bodies go in the water, bodies pop up out of the water. People that drowned usually end up, or parts of them end up surfacing. And the people in that particular area that drowned that I noticed 3 or 4 of them, their bodies were found within a day or two. Now, are there some that have never been found? Very possibly. It's a big ocean, right? Depending on the currents. You mentioned, ebb currents or something like that. I don't even know how to pronounce it.
Yeah, well, you've got the tidal currents. Yeah, it comes in, it goes out, but then you also have a period of slack water where, the momentum, whichever direction it's going, right? Like low tide for the area, again, like this is from another gauging station, not right there on the beach, but low tide, like peak low tide is, I think was like 7:50 a.m. or something. Again, we don't have like a huge tidal shift, but in the period of the water coming out and coming back in, there's a transitional period typically called slack water. And that usually happens at peak or low tide, but it also can happen, a couple hours before or after. But that's also when currents can be stronger too, specifically for whichever direction the tide is going. Typically low tide, depending on how big the tidal shift is. Like there's a lot of variables there. So yeah, that's a weird thing, man. There, that area is not, it's not like some of the places, on the Oregon coast that are sitting in coves or like off to a really sharp point where, in the wintertime you can drive a school bus through through the barrels. I mean, you're talking, the wave energy, that time of year for that part of the north coast of Dominican Republic is like, maybe 2 or 3 feet. That's waist high. Could you get in trouble? Yeah, sure, but it's not get knocked over, maybe, but for an adult, typically it's not going to be that dangerous. But man, there's so many questions in my mind about like what's really going on down there that it's a tough call because we just don't have a ton of information. We can go by historical context, we can use historical data, which is certainly valuable, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot that doesn't really add up, so we're trying to put the pieces together.
Yeah, yeah. Once you stop working the angles work you, right? So the question
Yeah.
and the question and the mystery continues of what's happened to Sudiksha. Now the other part of it is in the States, in the United States, with any kind of stranger abduction, 76% of the victims that were abducted are dead within 3 hours. Okay. I'm not ready to write this girl off without a body. I'm just telling you. I'm telling the folks out there. I'm telling all of my viewers. I am just not ready to do that. I'm just not ready to do that. Don't forget, we have other cases that turned out extremely well through stranger abductions, right? Elizabeth Smart. Elizabeth Smart. There's a number one example of somebody that survived, a young girl, beautiful girl that survived a horrific stranger abduction. All right. Down there, because of all this carrying on and going on, and this, the whole trafficking situation. I mean, who knows if she's still alive or not? I mean, all I know, it's a really bad area when you step outside, from what I understand, when you get off the hotel, So you have a bad crew down there. But also too, you're supposed to have really good security around that beach and around that hotel. Again, no cameras at all anywhere on that beach, and again, I understand where the parents are coming from, and I understand why they want her declared dead. But again, and I'm just not ready. I need a body. I still have hope. I want to see. I need to see it. It's just that way. I mean, and the other thing is, their clothes. I mean, why would when he woke up and decided to go back to the hotel, I guess maybe he didn't see her clothes or whatever. But if one of his statements is, because there's a number of statements here, I saw her heading towards her clothes, and I think that was early on. Why would you not look to see where you last saw her before you leave? If you look where you last saw her, you would see her clothes. And I don't think you would believe she went back to the hotel without her clothes. I mean, there's just too many questions here.
Yeah.
There's just too many questions. And don't forget, this guy's a hero at this point too for saving her. And I agree with that. I think he did rescue her out of a wave. But what happened after that, I don't know. Don't forget, he looked like he was pretty intoxicated. I think he even admitted that, throwing up as he got on the beach. So, I mean, he could just get up and, off he goes back to the hotel, just trying to get his brains back together from the night before, if you will, I mean, over a rough hangover. I mean, and again, it's interesting what we have here, and we're going to have to wait and see, what's going on. I mean, he has not been called a person of interest by the police. By the police, he has not been called a person of interest, and nor has he been called a suspect. And between that, there's miles between person of interest and suspect. There's miles. Okay. But I got to tell you that, it seemed they wanted to hold on to him. And I guess it's because he was the last one to see her that they know of.
Yeah.
Alive. So they wanted to hold on to him. But they could not come up with any charges. They could not even call him a person of interest. So, fortunately, for him, they let him go, and he's home. I'm glad he's home, and hopefully he's okay. But there are a lot of questions here. I mean, he even said it was a very sad situation. It is a very sad situation. I'm doing a lot of the talking here. Please talk.
No, you're like, these are all great points, John, because that's exactly what we're left with. There's a bunch of questions. And, I know that there was a lot of chatter about, the authorities holding this kid. And, it's important to bring this out too, like in the world of policing, right? Like, that's just standard operating procedure. Like you said, he's not a person of interest, but when you have somebody that's gone missing and you actually have somebody that actually saw this person, the last person to see him alive, you have to, I mean, they can't hold them forever without charges, but they did their job the way that they were supposed to do it. And they kept him there because they got to get that story multiple times. I mean, he's obviously coming off a bender. I mean, he's a young kid. Like they've got to do things correctly, and they've got to ask him these same questions we're kicking around, multiple times. Like it's just they're looking for answers as much as we are, and I think they did right, not only by him, and that might sound kind of weird, right? Like, yeah, they're keeping him within the Dominican Republic there. They're questioning him. They're putting him through some of the process, but like that's also giving him and anybody he's affiliated with a chance to clear his name too. Like, so it works both ways. Like, of course they're going to see if he's going to trip himself up, but they also want to take the information that he's given and they're going to try to vet that as well. And I think that's why we see him now getting cut loose, because right now they just don't have anything. You can't just, this isn't, 1500, circa 1500, Europe, like where you can just detain somebody and leave them in the can for indefinite period of time till something shakes out. It doesn't work like that. So I'm sure that is a not comfortable experience. It's not. I can tell you for sure it's not. But I am glad that they didn't just rush to judgment on either end of the spectrum on this kid, because he is still a young man. Like you just have to do your due diligence. And I've got to give the authorities down there credit for at least trying to flesh that out to the best of their ability, which I think that they did. Because at this point, like, if there's nothing else to go on and there's really nothing to explore and there's not an inconsistency worth, avenue worth going down, they have to cut him loose. That's just due process. Like, they have to do it. And I mean, I don't know where they go from here. I haven't found anything, but I'd be curious because there are other questions in my mind. Like if there is a body, provided she didn't get abducted to somewhere else and get killed immediately, I'm curious where the authorities looked. I'm concerned about like their search radius, like were they using sniffer dogs? Like, what were they? I mean, sure, they've got some protocols. I just don't know what they are. But those are some of the things that would be germane to an investigation, because, well, there's some variables that along that stretch of beach, going a mile either way, that lend them. If we're not looking at a body going out to water, there's a lot of places to bury a body in that forest. So we just don't know what happened.
All I could say is we send our deepest sympathies out to the family. But like and I'm sorry for what they're going through. And that's the worst thing that can happen to a family.
100%.
Not knowing where your daughter is.
Yeah.
Not having a body so you can have any kind of, funeral rites or whatever rites, the culture usually performs, right? I mean, when somebody dies. So, in looking at it, I mean, it's got to be horrible, because it the people we've talked to in all the years that have had missing children, especially, not knowing where they're at is haunting.
Yeah.
It haunts them, and it'll haunt them forever. That's why I'm hoping that at some point here, she is found. I'm hoping she's found alive. I will have hope until I see her body. But if she's not, at least, there'll be an ending, and everybody will know, one way or the other, how she died. Hopefully. So anyway, is there anything else you want to say before we break?
No, I think we've got it covered for now, but we'll keep kicking it around and keep our eyes on it, because there's more here. We just don't have the next, block, so to speak, in the wall to keep going. So right now everything is just theoretical, and we can build that out, but barring new information, we're kind of SOL.
Yeah, no, you gotta, it's sad to say, I think we've got to find her
Yeah.
before we have any more information. I truly mean that. Unless somebody comes forward, but you think if somebody is coming forward, they would have come forward already. I know what I have. I think I want to know if they put up a reward because of this element that's outside the hotel, right?
Hmm.
It needs money. Okay. And they're looking for money in all different places. How about a nice big reward? Shouldn't we start some kind of reward, or somebody should start some kind of reward if there's not a reward already? There should be a reward already for any information on her. I haven't heard anything about that.
I haven't
I
either.
just
Yeah.
thought about that a little while ago. You know, I mean, if it was in the United States, we'd be running with some kind of reward. I have not heard of a reward for her yet. Please let me know, any of you out there, if you've heard anything on this about a reward, because again, I've seen people drown, but I've always seen bodies, pretty much always body surface bodies come up, body parts if they were weighted down with with cement or something. I mean, but sooner or later, bodies that go into water usually rise up to the water. And that has been in that particular area when that has happened. It's been within a few days. It's
Hmm.
been quite a while now. We're waiting, and she's nowhere to be found at this point in time.
Yep.
Well, anyway, if you have nothing else to say, thank you so much. As always, we're honored to have you. Appreciate your time. And we will keep our eye on this. We'll watch where it goes. We're definitely staying on top of it. And we'll see what more has to be revealed. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. I really appreciate it. Live in a very violent world. Please take care of yourselves. Keep your eyes open. Stay on your toes. And until we meet again, take care and God bless. Thank you, Dustin.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, John. Thanks to your audience too. Always appreciate those guys, all of them.
And they love you.
They're great. Yeah.